Bo yang do bo zu be zong zhi bo dong xiu ci den bo de wo shi bo ju den jiang ju bo de yu ko lo ju wo lo na me bo lo dong me dong ju de bo song jie jiong de be jiao wo jiao jiao do bo lo xiang zhen qiu do jiao su jie wu gang zhe ge nian zu wo jue dang zhe sa qian de nang gong bo de bo ma nian ji dian de nang zhu jie song de zhe ge bo zhe na xiang zhe na da gong zhu do zu song yi xie jiao zu si jie ne bo zhao bo ji dian song na lang ye wo gong bo qiu nian zhe na xiang zhe千九点八之面的月交，三度照我就那相子。对着见着西波所望见，两面之间就那相子。我不突厥七点八，当即千百点八。三当眼点叫做见，对见是那相子。大边的长之环境，给别人送点追，许多的当求救吧，现就就那相子。这年正月那样的，老爸到那找的，先给当爸一点点，给的那样相子。别把这样们家先给我别送说吧。让给三年用手的，对年上节的吧。干嘛让人忙面当，就忙喜欢去吧。面浪落到真道不，这些就能得到。三能的人当起是报应，我光当年真正着的。我当那当七月老出云，随便走来着我哟。
Thus I've heard. At one time, the Blessed One was dwelling in the royal domain of Vulture Creek Mountain with a great gathering of monks and a great assembly of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Blessed One was absorbed in the samadhi of the many aspects of phenomena called profound appearance. At the same time, noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva, looking at the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom, saw the five skandhas in their natural emptiness. Then, through the power of the Buddha, Venerable Shariputra said to the noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva, how should a son of the lineage trained who wishes to follow the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom? Thus he spoke, and the noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva answered the Venerable Sharadvati Putra with these words. Shariputra, those men and women of the lineage who wish to follow the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom should look at it like this. The five skandhas should be seen purely in their natural emptiness. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form also is not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, recognition, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, like this, all phenomena are emptiness, and having no characteristics, they are unborn and unceasing. They are not impure or pure, they neither decrease nor increase. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no recognition, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no appearance, no sound, no smell, no taste, no sensation, no phenomena. There is no quality of sight, and so on until no quality of mind and no quality of mental consciousness. There is no ignorance and no exhaustion of ignorance, and so on up to no old age and death and no exhaustion of old age and death. In the same way, there is no suffering, no origin, no ending, and no path. No wisdom, no attainment, and no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, since there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and abide by means of the profound perfection of wisdom. And since their minds have no obscurations, they have no fear. Transcending falsity, they attain nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times have relied upon the perfection of wisdom, and have become true and complete Buddhas of unsurpassable, perfect, and complete enlightenment. Therefore, the mantra of the profound perfection of wisdom, the mantra of insight, the unsurpassed mantra, the unequaled mantra, the mantra which calms all suffering should be known as truth, for it is not deceptive. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is proclaimed. Teata om gate gate paragate parasamgate bodhi soha. Shariputra, this is how a bodhisattva mahasattva should train in the profound perfection of wisdom. Then the Blessed One arose from that samadhi and said to the bodhisattva mahasattva noble Avalokiteshvara that he had spoken well. Well done, O son of the lineage, it is so. O son of the lineage, since it is just so, the profound perfection of wisdom should be practiced just as you have taught, and the Tathagatas will also rejoice. When the Blessed One had said this, the Venerable Sharadvatiputra and noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva and the entire gathering, as well as worldly beings, gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, rejoiced and praised the words of the Blessed One.
Let's just, you just muted because
Benjo Dubi Bodon Adesha Nyane Shinlo Juna Suwande Shabo Tome Yenye Norude Chode Deye Dedan Chobe Sezon Gosa Nune Sune Jajin Shibi Juna Suwande Jayan Yume Shunji Lujo Dao Zhobo Ribi Kujo Sanje Gongzhong Baba Yese Su Fangwa Daye Jina Suwande Xie Zhuo Dangbi Chunga Ade Sha Kadang Denbi Menguo Zhou Denji 念旧那些过去所罗所，阿当那么那所我的，阿杰心的自己做个嘛，我都这边我手接做的，当我点别到不开主见，要是就把接了所我的。 教松根的老马多结长，看了刚的些年去做，教导天母不着自己的，这些老马能拿所的，让家所着跟了大爷的，给上他把这边中秋。 세베 저베 도게 저보이 선제 신예 노노 소원데 제와 그도 양도 노모도 그메 저저 베라 노셔지 사도 노저 여데 로조네 도저 창게 고 녀도 조 三界知道，作界jono no，上求波多多念就作界，大业切切界别错那界，多罗宾些三界如果修三界就作界jono no，上求波多多念就作界，大业切切界别错那界。 多罗天谢上界诸波修上界就作界就能老相救波多当年就作界大业结界结别错那界多罗天谢上界诸波修哎呀。 哎，当我做托马金罗去吧，去托马金罗去吧，是，那个金罗去吧，是那个开始老多那个，接到老人那么出去下个节呢，那工作去些在那对去，你这个多，你对实际嘛，当早就工作去些季节，你第二个是对着老人前年节的，你老人前年节个那么出去，托马开的这个的，谁接了呢？接到人那属于去主动的，他几十年就把接不了，我就对那个要嘛的，你老人说的对接嘛的。 电脑上就就说嘛，那姐姐，那面对的片呢，那我是基本当被也，那看就基本当被下野生一些了啊，那电脑做别给钱嘛。
So there's a tradition of keeping teachings of the great deities on the stages of the path to enlightenment, or the Lam Rim Chenmo. The great teachers, the Lam Rim lineage gurus, were traditionally given these teachings based on, then prior to giving the Lam Rim teachings, teacher and about students or the followers or the listeners were collaboratively engaged in the extensive prayers of the recitations of the full length or the detailed Lam Rim supplication to the lineage gurus, and and also the detailed practice of six preparations for Jora schedules, practice of six preparatory rites, in other words, and so forth. However, we are not having sufficient time to really to follow those recitations in detail, but we do recite the supplication verse to the Lam Rim lineage gurus, and also followed by the offering of mandala.
아니 주변 담아서 손질라야 된저게 이 내데 멤버 된저잖아요. 또바게 랑했어요. 데 주제 코로나는 연구해서 된저 손질도 알아는 생이 폐게 첨부.
So it is said by the great teachers of the past have said that it has a great purpose of going through all these recitations, such as supplication verse to the lineage gurus and so on so forth, prior to receiving one's teachings.
당가서 같은 로인다. 당가서게네 대지 손질나게 최 대바침에 최이마마 메초바 강사 대바침에 제서 치고서 네 된저게 체다. 가족이 최대 대바침에 최 친해져와 인자네. 네 강가게 상추선을 마타 친제제네 미나 제보와 인자네. 네 랑게 된제 되는라 덤버 투병 볼라랑 레지베 라마스 거대지. 네 랑게 타고다 랑게 제제바마 집에 선제나 대화되지 동해 면되신다. 네 대바치기 당달라지 가르쳐야지 지 고코지 당달라 세드미 손에지 미바체네 아니 고코데 가르쳐잖아 아니 땐도 대화 타바침도 타바초 아니 조베 선제지 공부데 인스 아니 대인바데네 녜마라라이 근데 란다라냐기 선제다기 때문에 녜파도 타바탄지 제바지 타바 제기 대체되는 게 체내 제기 인세지 근데 맞좀 마탈로 거인자 근데 미바체기다.
So let's take our time to cultivate proper motivations or the positive motivations to receive the teachings. As there is a saying that it is not the Dharma that is important to become a Mahayana Dharma, but the individual who is actually engaging in the practice, the practitioners, should be the Mahayana practitioners. That's all matter. So, so therefore, we as the practitioner or the followers of the Mahayana Dharma, Mahayana teachings, one must cultivate one's motivations. One's motivations of receiving these teachings must be embraced or influenced by the cultivation of bodhicitta. This can be done by visualizing Buddha Shakyamuni in front of oneself, surrounded by all those great Lam Rim lineage gurus, and their presence, being in their presence, surrounded by entire sentient beings who, as we wish to achieve happiness and overcome sufferings, they too have similar wish to achieve happiness and overcome sufferings. And they're looking for something that is to be achieved. And what they are looking for achieved is to everlasting happiness. So the everlasting happiness should be the state of complete enlightenment, or the everlasting happiness should be the state of complete enlightenment. So it is therefore my sole purpose of receiving these teachings of the Lam Rim Chenmo today is to establish entire sentient beings, including myself, state of the complete enlightenment. Let's take 2 to 3 minutes to meditate on it.
아야, 다른지 내가 예된데 대치 생인데 내가 조배 상지지 고마다 버터 지는 매바치. 아니 대파도 대치 생인데 요면 땡큐 와 인사네. 근데 이게 대치 주터게 터텔라 아니 소소게 냥선내 발로 뭐 터고. 터발라네 지 다정만 나와지래. 일단은 드리지 데린 거스 뭐 만나와 되네 상조랑지를.
So oneself and all other sentient beings, in order to gain the state of happiness, everlasting happiness, state of Buddhahood or the state of enlightenment is the highest state of happiness. This is what we are this is our objective of our achievement. So therefore, we are, trying our best to find a methods or the skillful means to achieve that level of happiness. So, so therefore, in order to gain such a happiness, in order to find a method which leads oneself to such state of happiness, one must first listen to the teachings, and then teachings must be given correctly by the teacher. And the correct teaching that we're receiving today, the particular teaching that we're receiving today, it's a great deities on the stages of the path to enlightenment, Lam Rim Chenmo.
다 된대지 좀 되네. 시바가서 자이 사지 시제. 조금 전부 된비신 제법 비쳐와. 네 당나라 기바제비시 취제 제와. 저원이다 네베 출라니 시제다 셔와. 당방거 좀 너무 짓다지 이런 봐. 자이 사지 시제.
So these teachings will be given under the headings, under the four major outlines, which is the greatness. The first outlines are the greatness of the authors given in order to show the teachings as noble source. The second outline is showing the greatness of the teachings in order to engender respect for the teachings. And third is the greatness of the enabling one to know that all of the teachings are free from contradictions. And then the fourth, the greatness of the enabling one to understand that all of the teachings, all of the scriptures are instructions for practice. So under such, four major outlines, we were receiving these teachings today.
아니 랑제서 지바텔 니체 랑제서 신년 때비스다 때는 로치다자 이름 바스 되니 바다 맞춰 강강해 봤지.
So then this will then further subdivided by subdivisions of the outlines. In other words, as relying upon the spiritual teacher is the root of one's path, and having relied upon the teachers, how to listen to the teachings of the Dharma and how to teach the Dharma.
다 때는 로치다자 이름 발라 니체 대이 때는 님볼렘 비시 규와다 님보 제단렘 비치 니체 다 동보지자 다 님보 제단렘 비치들라 니체 랑지 나자라 님보 제다 님볼렘지 뭐지 다 동보지자 다 님볼렘 지모들라 송지 지부 총면다 대모연 랑지를 마냥선지 지부 제다 대모연 랑지를 마냥선지 지부 쳔비 랑지를 마냥선지 다가 저 사제 타마 지부 쳔비 랑지를 마냥선지 되면 자이 사제 마 황제나
So we are under the headings, under the outlines of receiving the teachings, the stages of the path for the person of great capacities.
다 저게 주변 챔피언 라지르만 냥서 렌츠들라 자이 사제송 아니 대체는 주변 고담바 센제 코나데 바 센데 제다 지비츠 네 센제네 쇼발라 로체노네 샹주기 센이 제네 아니 샹주 센비 쇼발라 간 그거래 세데 사지 되면 되다 다양.
So out of that, there are 3 headings again under this stages of the path for the great capacities. It is showing that developing the spirit of enlightenment is the only entrance to Mahayana, how to develop the spirit of enlightenment, and how to learn the Bodhisattva's deeds after developing the spirit of enlightenment. We are under the 3rd outlines, which is how to learn the Bodhisattva's deed after developing the spirit of enlightenment.
다 사제 소바들은 세진의 쉐발로 로그비 전세 아니 더시 레레와라 로베 아니 사제 메두가 템바 아니 로바니라 로바 생각나서 다 더시 레레와라 로베 사제 메두가 가르르잖아 아니 예바도 더시 송제 거래 더시 야마저 거래 세 엔티골 거스포.
So, how to learn the Bodhisattva's deeds after developing the spirit of enlightenment, and how do we really, and how to, then this will then be followed by the how to follow the precepts of the Bodhisattvas, and then it is not just sufficient to practice, to gain the state of enlightenment just by practicing either one of those 2 aspects, whether wisdom aspect or the method aspect, but rather one's practice must be integrated practice of both wisdom aspect as well as the method aspects. Without one another will not enable one to gain the state of enlightenment.
지당아서 디 거스 바바 토다 셔러세데 상추선데 도미도 로니라 랑고 아니 지당 뒤제 토다 셔러다 따와다 셔바스네 계시 셔소나 아니 예족에 선바데 진제당 장로다 뜻을 멈춰대 아니 슈비코는 제로 아니 다음에 예지만 달라서 주로 다음에 차라도 별로듯이 용차 줘버데 아니 다이 차도로 로라 뒤제 거스 바바 다시 이게 류를 주던데 라라지 셰고.
So here in this particular context, when we speak about, the wisdom aspect and the method aspects should be understood. The wisdom realizing emptiness as a wisdom aspect, and the method aspect is the spirit of enlightenment or the bodhicitta. However, in general, when speaking about wisdom aspect and the method aspect, it is not necessarily be, referring to those 2. There are many other aspects, such as renunciations, taking refuge in rituals, and so on and so forth, are all included, all belongs to the category of the method aspect. And similarly, all this the understanding the view of 4 noble truths, as well as the 16 attributes of the 4 noble truths, are all belongs to the category of wisdom aspect.
당가서 카투 로게다 카투 가서 가서게 네 카투 용대던 대화 간데 차고 그랬잖아. 저당 터시 손에 터시 야태서 뭐이나 저거 산제 더 못어서 이제 제제 아니 거기서 봐봐 다는 거 좁아진 까비 꺾이와 있잖아. 아니 되게 종생적으로 되마지 시와이나 소소로 고아들 책으로 와. 아니 저당에는 가서 줄루기 좋다 소소라야래 아니 지 따와 있잖아. 그동 간료열에서 되게 고아지 대서벌에도 나다 제자로 와. 그래서 되지 마토나야 아니 다시 야마되어서 되게 봐도 그거래. 대마저에나 턱 장바 돈이도 별로 장바 개개 연구 말에 세지. So
we should have a proper understanding of this. Just mere, practice of the wisdom aspect alone, the mere practice of the wisdom aspect will enable one to gain a state of enlightenment, nor the practice of mere method aspect will establish oneself to the state of enlightenment. In other words, in order to gain the state of enlightenment, one's practice of this 2 must be combined or conjoined. The conjoined practice of the wisdom aspect and the method aspect will establish oneself to the state of enlightenment. So this should be, one must understand this very clearly. So if it is possible, then it is always good to also know the different, philosophical viewpoints of the other philosophical tenets and so on and so forth. If that is not possible, it is at least we should have a proper understanding of isolating those two practices. One another will not enable one to gain the state of enlightenment.
당가서 카투 로에 당가 카투 가서가한테 데려가 제대 동원념이
다가라 이름 제라슬어서
도대체 내게 발레 말로도 로에 사제 타마데 봐도 로트는 전에요 또 다가도이다 제대 동원념이 동생당 예셔대 당모념이 당생당 대대 게이 또바 타치 코송의 준비 취재 당진이나 취재 다음에 제 따와니나 니바나지 셰당당 가제라 소바 젠도 넘바 탕제도 가리지 체데샤와 체데샤네 레 체데샤라 아니 텐도 메롱어 송도아 되게 레히지 마저 렌제 쳤어.
So now we're reading through the text. It is on the page 95. We're on the middle of the fourth paragraph. It says, if every sort of virtuous conceptual thoughts, such as the generous attitude, when thinking I shall give these things, and the attitude of restraint, when thinking I shall restrain from this wrongdoing, where an apprehension of self of objects and objects that misconceive the three sphere, agent, object, and recipients, then it would be the right. And appear that everyone finding the view of selflessness of object should completely, reject virtuous conceptual thought, just as they reject hostility, pride, etc. It would be quite wrong for them to purposefully cultivate those virtues.
또 도망가서 가슴에 봐 코송생이 지금 언제자 코송세디 짐바도 동호에나 짐바 동안보다 짐바 동세이 아니 짐비 제송보대로 코송세나라 그랬을라다.
So here now, one thing we need to understand, the Korsum in Tibetan, which is translated here in English as the three spheres, right? Three spheres. So what is meant by three spheres? Let's take an example of someone who's actually engaging in the practice of generosity. Here, the three spheres should be understood in this particular context. The context of someone who's engaging in the practice of generosity is the person, the practitioner himself, and what is to be given to someone when we practice generosity. What is, in other words, the chimbidze, which is the substance that is to be given to the someone, and the receiver or the recipients of the substances of the object of generosity. So these three. So here in this particular text, it says that agent, object, and recipients.
다 되게 대라 소박이 또바 탕지 천진이나 천진선의 된진이라다. 천진선은 천진이 진바데 된진이 진바 지바래.
So here it says now, it's the wrong, I shall restrain from this wrongdoing, where an apprehension of self of object that misconceives. It says that the misconceives. So here the misconception here referring to the grasping at self, or grasping at the independent self, in other words.
Yeah. 다 든지게 짐바 동안다 추진 송원라 소바다 다 용수 조바 또바 그래서 강가 천지게 지바이나 남의 또비 강사게 아니 단제나지 가고바 강시 가고로 와스 가고바 가고레 아니 남의 또비 아니 강사 대다기 최대니네 아니 집이 냐네다 추진 송원다 최대니네 때리고 말어 와스 가르쳐서나 딘제로 와스.
So what it says here is now, if someone engages in practice of generosity, moral conduct, and so on and so forth, if the practitioner's is practice of such, the practices are, are actually influenced by this misconceptions with regard to self that we talked about earlier, then all the practice of generosity and moralities will not really become a cause for liberations, because those are all the practices are all actually influenced by the misconceptions with regard to self, with regard to self or the I.
아야, 제 가르에서는 저런 도기 논전에 그래서 강가 뒤질래서 나라서 천지기 집이 뒤질래서 와서 인산의 덴제레도 덴제이나 아니 가 다음에 단지 가바나지 가고래 아니 저거 다음에 냥래 때리고 말이에요.
So this cannot be taken as actual practice of the noble ones, as you have mentioned earlier. So no, we're actually arguing with the other's position by saying that you have already mentioned you already mentioned earlier that all the practice other than practice of meditation of nothingness are all said to be a demonic practice. It's a demonic practice. So therefore, this will not really, those are the practice such as practice of generosity and so forth needs to be, negated. It needs to be refuted according to your own position, because you have identified and you have actually recognized and said that those are the practice that are actually obstacle for one's own the practice of liberation and so on.
맞아, 매제다 지금 또바탕지 천지에서 라게 지소나 리바테 돈 까고래라다.
So here now, what is important for us to understand in this particular passage is that, we should not take all those conceptual thoughts, in other words, conceptions or the conceptual thoughts are all, need to be abandoned. If we should not have this kind of notion. If this is what someone is arguing, then you should be ready. You should have a ready answer. You should arrange a ready-made answer to it. So if someone argues, if one raises this kind of argument, and this should be the answer, practice of generosity and so forth, wasn't, practice of generosity and moral conduct and so forth.
대대오냐비 또바탕지 코스도 또비 취제 당신의 샤나 현재 제년에 셈바당 denjo chewa dang yenju donghe semba dang chondro dang lenje mare chondro dang len de lenje ben de jong dang shamba dang jinji dang shangchu ji san jang dang ju sen je loja la loja la jang tangji de de o de de jong de le yen de dang yimi de yu 냥도 산에 녜바 장거바 샤다 임베 대달라 제다 녜바 체와 상도 취제 당진 제체的罗啦 양 취제 다음에라 녜바 제장 체와 장바 대장도 랑대다게 녜바 제초도 로예 쇼바다 따이 쇼니 사장단 겐도 손에 니가라 녜시 슈자라 제르와 제사 메바 로소도 네지
So here now, that's a very comprehensive paragraphs to answer these questions here, where it says, if all conceptual thoughts which think this is this were conceptions of the self of object that misconceive the three sphere, then what about contemplating the good qualities of the teacher, contemplating leisures and opportunities, death and suffering of the miserable realms, and training in the practice of going for refuge, thinking how a sudden action gives rise to a sudden result, training in love, compassion, and the spirit of enlightenment, and practicing in the precepts of the engaged spirit of enlightenment. Since all of this path requires only that you induce certain knowledge by thinking this comes from that, and this has the good qualities of the faults. You would increase your conceptions of the self of object commensurate with your certainty about this path. Conversely, you would become less certain about the path commensurate with the certain knowledge of the selfness of the object. You could sustain in meditations. The deeds component, the component and view, the view components would thus become mutually exclusive, like hot and cold, and you would then never develop a long-lasting and very forceful certainty about both views and deeds.
되게 리바 차도 쉬울 당에 너르와 배나 가서 지질에 자서는 참도 거로 그래 배나 상추기 생년에 저기는 상추기 생라 dum바슈 가세 쳐원로와 전지 아니 다들 컴페트 도셔레베스.
So here now it's a very good argument, and so if this is the case, in other words, according to others' position, but if this is the case, then how about if you engage in the practice of the spirit of enlightenment, in other words, the bodhicitta, the more intense practice you engage in this bodhicitta, and the more, the more development of the grasping of self take place, if this is the case.
다음에 또 별로 가세지 컴페트 도와 전지 상추기 생데 냥도 오래베스. 지질 자네라.
So then here again, if this is the case, then is this what you are saying, that the more you meditate on and developed the wisdom realizing selflessness, the more declination of your bodhicitta take place. Other positions.
나지 딱 고주나 아니 레터를 이치 가세 도와 전지 당지 컴페트 도와 아니 다음에 또 별로 가세기 슈체는 저기 레터를 이치에 많이도 그래 레베스.
So according to your position, it seems that is it again asking question to the others position by saying that the more you develop faith and appreciation to the law of cause and effect, the more your declination of your wisdom realizing emptiness will take place. Similarly, the more you develop the wisdom realizing selflessness, the more declination of your appreciation and the faith in law of cause and effect will take place. According to
가르서는 대로와 또바 당지 센지의 댄스이나 데메 다음에 또 비셔러데 당지기 녀보로와 인자데 녀보 컴페트 도에디 파쇼데 냥고레 파쇼데 제어서 녀보 추쇼데 연구 말이 차단하기로와.
So all those, because as you have already mentioned earlier, that all those conceptions are said to be the misconception with regard to the self or I. So because the misconception of of self misconception with regard to self and I should be negated, should be eradicated by means of understanding selflessness.
다 저런게 세도 제나 아니 토데 싫어니보다 차장님도 아니 냥 질지 냥도 지편 지로 제나 요사코로 말어 왔어. 그래서나 저런 또바탄지 단지를 사러 세디.
According to your own statement earlier, still we are arguing with others' position by saying, according to your own, statement that since all conceptions believed to be the misconception with regard to the self or I, then the practice of the method and wisdom should be the hotness and coldness, the hot and cold, because the hot and cold cannot, simultaneously exist within one locus. Similarly, the wisdom realizing selflessness and wisdom realizing selflessness and conception which misapprehends the self cannot go hand to hand.
맞죠. 저는 단계 저도 내자 세월아. 내자니까 뒤냐도 공패도 좀 메시래. 요사면도 안 되노.
According to the text, what is the which means harming and harm. Harming and harm cannot develop simultaneously without undermining other. So therefore, this misconception with regard to the self and the wisdom realizing selfnesses are harming and harm.
됐지. 배정 가서 시거질에 되래. 배나 따와도 슈비기 차도 연수 줘봐대 배정 호바이 질은 무슨 원도 봐 여만이 연수 슈비고 되는 거래. 록 가서 영화 태어나야.
도병원 두도 세는지.
도병원 되는 거래.
슈비리디.
슈바이리디.
그래서 근데
저주 생라 소바다 도병원 되는 거. 로비지. 상마제지 봐.
So here, because all those realizations of, the method aspects, such as, bodhicitta and renunciation, so on and so forth, are all belongs to the category of conceptions or the conceptual thoughts. Here now it is referring to someone who has not gained the state of enlightenment. But they said that's an option, of course, for someone who already gained the state of enlightenment. There's no such conceptions. But then even those who are on the high levels of realizations, who have gained high levels of realizations, so long as they are not enlightened, and their method aspect of the practice are all based on conceptions.
되게 크게 다른 건지 제도 제나 가서 저도 연대 생애대로 근데 레드 야고 제소나 연대 대중고리 레드도 제나 아니 님이 대중고리 세기 저기 넘버 통치데 매와지 용수 줘봐대 아니 당진 콘도 또서나 아니 쇼치도 가고 제로.
So if we were to reject entire activities which actually derive from one's conceptions across the board, then everything should be negated. All this practice should be refuted, such as practice of having appreciation to the law of cause and effect, and so on and so forth.
대체도 내가 배치 보다 저서 가서기야 거기서 매버서를 지는 말에 로 가서 줘야돼 샤쇼바니 나이 쇼바니 되잖아요. 나가 드로잉 거인선 쇼바니의 개체성 가르래. 아니 지기지를 간다 때는 로고래 세대 백개체 뭐로.
So it is very, very important to understand, how actually the birds actually, cruise themselves. The birds cruise themselves by relying upon the two wings. Similarly, to free ourselves from the secular existence, to gain the state of enlightenment, it requires the both wisdom aspect and method aspect, as a bird requires two wings.
예, 당연로기다. 제사면 도치 제사면 번로오치 대시를 제비거나 추구 터자 어레 제비다는 추구 터자 조바당 zuku 터자 시바 이 메가와타 랑제세야 다니스 쳔만 젠비 미데 디자야 디자야 말레비 쭈제라 예시 제바당 델레 조와다 델레 죄연 데요라 예시 제바 이 메가와 시고소 소데레.
So here it says now, therefore it says, just as in the context of the goal, there's no contradiction that a bodhisattva's embodiment of the truth and the bodhisattva's, the Buddha's embodiment of the truth and the Buddha's embodiment of a form are both presented as attainment and so on. The path you must induce without any contradictions and certain knowledge of the total freedom from the elaboration of the conception of science of the true existence in the two kinds of the self with respect to even a particle of a mental object, and certain knowledge that this comes from that, and this has this quality of the false.
Oh, teacher. Teacher, nga repeat ponsa pa sana to anye na answer. Sanje ko dela ani chuko de zuko sela uda ya ba dela ba jeba to na ani zuko la longo da chuko ja ani chuko la mo nyuko de shi chuko sene ku yi dani sene la uro. Teacher ku ni bo de thoje dela ya lang de ba ni so de jo lenger se de khatu shena da 동반이 이제 따왔대나 배바당 아니 렌데제 나자니 때나 배바 지지 때는 게메데 냥술에 두바지 거버려 소애들이.
So here now, judging all the achievement of the enlightened achievement, which is embodiment of the four kayas. In other words, you could say the two kayas, and then if you further divide the two kayas, there will be there's the four kayas. There are two kayas belongs to the Dhammakaya, and then the another two kayas belongs to the Rupa kayas. The Dhammakayas is the wisdom truth body, or the wisdom, the Jnana kaya, and it's a Sabhava kaya. So those are the two which belongs to the Dhammakaya, two kayas which belongs to the Dhammakaya, and the two which belongs to the form or the Rupa kaya, which are the embodiment body, enjoyment body, and then emanation body. So those are what we call the embodiment of the four kayas, and those four kayas must be achieved by means of embarking upon the path of two truths, ultimate truth and the conventional truths. And as ultimate truth and the conventional truth must be realized, must be ascertained within one single entity. It is by means of having as a very precise ascertainment of the two truths within one locus will enables one to gain the state of enlightenment.
Tele se o ni udo to te ansa ji tawa deni tela betila ralebe londa jepe khode je chetan je rangi delu san yensila rangi di zanya maju ba tela bebe te tamba namba jubi sema tang to dame to beloche jetan jebi chu chonse jaya ma chuwa soso ngebi General number jobi tani bi samani pensi neje to roa tachume de kiki ji ke rosun joala nepa nena Tene Debani Toba, Jay Gumbani Shesha, Transado, Yende, Sweden and Laton Chembicos, Sheba, Shao, or something. Do that.
That's all. So here now, this in turn is contingent on how you determine the two truths, the philosophical view of what exists, and you're counted a person who knows the two truths and who has found the conqueror's intent. If you are conceived that the following two valid cognitions not only do not not only do not, of course, harm each other, but rather aid each other's. In other words, help each other's. The valid cognition that establish the ultimate, which is determined through scripture and recognizing to be the absence of the even particles of the essential nature in the way of being or ontological status of any phenomenon of cyclic existence or nirvana, and the conventional valid cognition that establish the cause and effect in their diverse workings are certain, without any confusion of even the slightest cause and effect. I shall explain this system in the inside section.
Tele Yaboba Coalition, dance of Yos Zobatin and Dido, Yos Zoba Seguro. Juday na sujit debani tela besila rale said Coagilana, and Debani Sana, Tanta Deba, the Kunzo Deba Seguro, Denshi the Medawa. Nobody is a China Chishi, and Kunzo Chishia, Tanya Deba, the Tanta Deba Selana degree.
So here it says it depends on the Shitembani, which is the true truths, the basis of the true truths are the basis. So the true truths are the ultimate truth and the conventional truths. The ultimate truth is the emptiness or non-inherent existence of things and event, and the conventional truth is the basis upon which this ultimate truth exists.
That's never Cheshire. Soon the Nache Father, Susoji Churtaje, any Rashi Juba, design member Sheba Dedan, young Delatin and Dejo say the language and not the table say anybody, any tiny bit Sama Casa Tombotella, and it Dada de Basela. Roa shit in the Nelutella paper tea, and try someone say a mania batella, Nelutatu Senalo, tell it Dada de Basela. Tanya Josi is an any repeat sentiment, and Tanya de Basenalo, but any Josi thing about the shake or so in the raw.
So here, in the let's summarize this particular paragraphs in a very lucid form. But now, when speaking about everything across the boards, entire phenomena, Zugni Nam Kimbarto, which means form all the way to the omniscient, the state of omniscience, are, there's no inherent existence from the beginning of form all the way state of omniscience. There's no such inherent existence. It is all lack of inherent existence. What it says here is now, we're actually establishing a Neluk Tartu, which is the ultimate mode of existence, or the actual mode of existence of the phenomena. That is what we call Neluk Tartu. And on the basis of this understanding, we have Delatene Dejung. From that, this arises. From this coming into being and so forth. Having a appreciation and one's understanding of how things arises out of how things coming into being due to its own causes and conditions will enable one to appreciate those cause and effect, the mechanism of cause and effect, which is the establishment of what we call the conventional truth or the conventionality. So how we can now say these two ideas will become actually support one another. So if one has a very precise or very proper if one possesses a proper understanding of Tyndale, which is the dependent originations, well then enables one to understand that, and you will gain a conviction how those two ideas of conventionality and ultimate are actually supporting each other. Here, so here dependent, the word dependent, pratitat in the Sanskrit, pratitat, or which just means the 10 in Tibetan, which in English it said that dependent. The very dependent, demonstrates that the things does not exist by its own right. That what actually is that is how it demonstrates.
John said it Tanya to Yoba, then you're salary, John saying the Tanya to Yoba, dancing in the Ranshi Maba coin, can you the GP Chidoiba?
So here now, 10 that we talked about earlier, it's a dependent. When speaking about the dependent, there's no things that exist independently. That is what it demonstrated, the first, pratita. And then Jung is a samudbata, in other words, which is the dependent originations, which entails that things does exist. It exists, but depending upon other factors, or it actually coming into being due to its own causes and conditions, will enable you to understand the conventional nature. In other words, just a combination of these two syllables, Tenjung, enables you to understand both ultimate truth as well as the conventional truth.
Tell God to God, Tente call and a Hale, Jippy Chidor, Pebble call. Tente be just saying, never to be just saying, Tente Salon, around the baby, Jella, Jella, just around your mother, can you tell it to your own child?
So therefore, it's a very, very, important to have a proper understanding, establish a proper understanding of this dependent originations. If you have this, then we normally have a index by according to the text that we have a certain reasonings why things are not independently existent, because it dependent upon other factors. Why things are not why things are dependent upon other factors, because it is dependent originations. So let's take a break here.
Sanje Shindo Mende Biwaye, Roge Nanda Sina Shobo Sho Yedanguru, Mede Naga Daya Daya Mi Chinadir. Ya, Tanga Menti Rogida. Ya, ay. 지다 다들 대진 조치 때 오는 시 요는 송에 소소아.
So it is also already said that, says without any confusion of even a slightest cause or cause or effect, I shall explain this system in the insight section. So, which means the detailed explanation will be given under the section of insight. Vipassana.
다가 제가 가서 때 캔서 쉬우지로 조소지 쳐대다 덴버 주가 생에다 라시 주가 생에요나 야나 때네 매고래 야나 나 가제 가서 단지 라시 주바에나 대시신 저 투여 건데요 말이 때네 매고래 다 간지.
So here now, if we accept, in general, if we accept all phenomena, form and so forth, are dependently existent, that's independently existent or the inherently existent, then we probably will not be able to find any explanation to it that is independently existent. And how can we really explain the actual mode of existence of all those things and events? So there's no such explanation could be found if we accept all things exist inherently or intrinsically.
변한 가속에 로셔도 이제 디셰기 변한 디셰라 마시는 디마실에 이제 남아줘봐 디셰지 최대다 가속에 무슨 로셔 통해서 미게 통해서 로야 되어서 용수 줘봐대 남아줘봐 매나 아니 디마실에 남아줘봐 가는 용시 그래 써야지.
So here now, let's take an example that if compounded phenomena such as the phenomena that we normally, such as our resources that we normally use as our resources, the compounded phenomena are not phenomena are not, lack of inherent existence. Then how can the uncompounded phenomena are inherent existence?
내가 만약에 쉬우 되서면도 마도 단다 가서 kinzo denpa dan tenta denpa sila de mege chota oma de sege do deba de sege to be ta san de chubi che de kinzo denpa da ta ba ten chi ja ro de de tenta denpa senge de ne nga soge chi ngo se thwa yo yin zan de denpa chuba tenta denpa sen la wa de so ki ko le yo de ko la oma tha je wa ge to be ta san sege de ko de de shu che do yo sa ra nga so san da do yin na ro wa yosu zoba taba de so to be ta san le se lo yo de lo yi ya zan de ma de yu de ne chuba ze me ba chi la 또베 따자서 탄년조 투디 아니 다다가서 엄마 탄저하게 아니 소소지 최용수 줘발로 또베 따자서 해야 되기 근데 고아대 자전 도르세 가마가마데 심하심하게 데려와 가서 주미지.
So here now, when we talk about the acceptance of the two truths, there are different ways in which they accept the two truths. The proponent of the two truths, each of those philosophical thoughts, the schools of thoughts, has a different way of accepting it. However, those acceptance, if you are familiar with the lower schools or the lower philosophical thoughts, such as Sutantika, such as Sutantikas, will actually give you an idea or actually to support you to move yourself from that lower school to the upper school of what we call the Madhyamaka Prasangika school. For instance, in the lower school or the philosophical tenets, the lower philosophical tenets such as Sutantika, when they identify identify the two truths. The two truths, the conventional truths and ultimate truths. Ultimate truths are said to be all the functional things are ultimate truth. And then the conventional truths are said to be it is imputed by conceptions. Those are the permanent phenomena are said to be the imputed phenomena. So this very basic understanding of two truths based on the lower school will move yourself to the upper school, such as higher school, in other words, higher school of thought of such as Prasangika.
this 당연 배션 로그인다. 단지 론송비 대세데 단다 하상이 되는 돈은 제체 장면은 론송스 장면도 상도 단데 되가는 론 동반이 벗선바 장 다 론송비 네 상도 대가서 최소게 됐다 두만 야선도 론송바데 가는도 소야 다이치도 여다 다이쇼 론송비 되네서 도대 이것을 지와라 소바 슈비 거인베 짐발로 소바 대코나 마체바 땡발라 또바오 셰다 또베 떠바상도 땡제 대다 메템바 도자 땡바네 메노 소도.
So here now it says Lungsumbe Döni, which means that as to the third scripture passage. So Hashang has already given a total of the three scriptural passage or the quotations quoted from the three different sutras. Now we are on the third passages, which is as to the third scripture passage, the one from the sutra requested by Brahma, since the context of this passage in the sutra is an analysis of the production and so on, in order to teach the generosity, etc., are not absolutely produced. It used the term conceptual thought to indicate that they are imputations by conceptual thoughts. It is not teaching that you should not involve yourself in these deeds or reject them.
디시지 탄 쳐탄지 제와여 봐 가실라 단다기 거데 가르세나 주소지 쳐탄지 대나 담바 제와여 메지 제바케 거라 대나 담베 제와 용서서 봐 까바레마도 아니 제단에 아니 저 가사라 또바 까바 때문에 말에 손도 대나 담바 제와 까바레 손도.
So here now what it says here is very precisely mentioned. It says since the context for this passage is a sutra, its analysis of the production and so forth, in order to teach that generosity and etc. are not absolutely produced. That doesn't mean that it's not produced. It is said it's not absolutely produced, or it is not, ultimately produced, which doesn't entail that it is not produced. What it entails is what it says here is it is not absolutely produced or the ultimately produced. We are refuting the production, ultimate production is actually rejected, not the production itself.
대가서 실현해 보는 줌에 제어면 담에 트메 로메세 제 모차 대한 담바 제어면 봐 대한 담바 줌에 대한 담바 담에세 돼요. 라지 줌에 라지 메바세 돼. 가자 무슨 가지 자야로.
So, similarly, we find this passage, this similar passage that we will find in our Heart Sutra, which we are all familiar with. In emptiness, there's no form, sukme, there's no feelings, so on and so forth, right? So, what it entails is not actually rejecting actual existence of the form and feelings, but rather it actually rejects ultimately existent form, ultimately existent feelings or the inherent existence of the form, inherent existence of the feelings are rejected. Not the actual feelings and forms of existence are rejected.
ngazo ne zuyo mare sanje zume ba sonja chane shero ni no de transwa na long de ngazo gomba de kola ni gaja ge cheba jane ni gomba de ko wala da.
So when we were asked a question by saying that form does not exist because it is spoken by the Buddha himself, form does no form and no feelings and so on and so forth, then we should have an answer to it, right? Our answer should be based on identifying the garja, which means the refutation, object of refutations. When we say no, suddenly we are talking about a negative. And what we are what we're talking about, what is not existent. So we need to first identify those and explain this by identifying the object of refutation, object of negation, in other words.
that's it. See the kind of the Konani said, the Konani the Juba, the Deba Juba, the Rashi Juba, the Tenchirela. The Konani Macheva said, Macheva La Tobas on Dua.
No, consistent. Absolutely love the done the cheaper ratio than the Denver Juba down Ganga cheaper. Then the Teshika Gamindo.
Ale says the Gato to pay the Konani to Juba said, the Quash with you, Gatoina, Budman Judos and Jero. Kono man, Kono Chico man, Maduba Rade said, Quabe Ninja.
Yeah, here now it says, etc., and are not absolutely produced. In other words, it is not, produced by its own side, by its own right. This will give you a more, understanding of what is meant by absolutely, not absolutely produced.
But the Kono Chico to a mother said, Mana country to her, any logic said, the Tanya to Yobate, when a Hashiji Maduba said, Yoba the 10 year Chiro. Naso de Mige, Kazola, Karsa, Tumbe Mata Goba Selo, the Ranshiji Maduba said, the Ranshiji Maduba sees a law you the Kono Yoba 10 year was. Then again, the Konani Maduba say you the Tanya Yoba 10 year.
So here now, when it says this is not absolutely produced, when it says not absolutely produced, then that is saying there is a way of that's then if it is not absolutely produced, then how it really is produced? It is not really saying there's no production. There's nothing that is produced, or there's no such things that exist. When it said, for instance, again, when we talk about Ranjinji Madupa, or the non-inherent existence, the very term non-inherent existence entails there's establishment of some kind of existence there.
That's it. Teachers, some judge about the Shopa, Tetnala, Lumagubi, go maybe. Paro the Shimba Tula Subi, Shopa Nala, Lo Goshin. Deyan, Tatani, Tapanem, Bene, Duna, Dunan, Jubana, Bebe, Du, Reshi, La. And Shamini Banana, maybe you the Shane, Teta Nansen, maybe Jesu so judge, so Jipajan, Melama de Shena, the Jimbo Metoba, Nansen Lomba, Joro, Son, and Hajanado.
So here now, let's read to the text again here. It says, therefore, since there's no time, when it is not necessary to practice these deeds, the six perfections and etc. Until you become a Buddha, it is incumbent upon you to train in these deeds. If you strive right now from the depth of your heart, you will accomplish with effort what you can achieve. With respect to the practice that you are unable to do for the time being, make an aspiration to do them, and as cause of the ability to practice them, accumulate the collections, clear away the obscurations, and make many aspirational prayers. Once you do this, it will not be long before you put them into practice.
Yeah.
This is a beautiful advice.
되지. 다 지단이랑 가서로 가서 장소노의 저는 슈버도 저는 마슈버 배잖아요. 다살레니 베상주 선바데서기 8월 신바 졸라 소바기 슈바라 로고고야나. 다 가서도 따지면로.
So we also touched that particular part, the passage during our last teachings, that if even the bodhisattvas has to rely on the practice of 6 perfections, then suddenly we as ordinary beings who are not even on the bodhisattva's path requires all those practices. We need to rely upon this practice of 6 perfections.
되지. 다 가서 거기서 보고 소소간에 거기서 보고 가르쳐 버렸잖아. 다 가서 단단히 와서네 리텐 대나기지 제와 주마전에 용투에라 카요라에게 몇째 이거 다 가서 내가 돈 벌어 왔다. 내려서 저와시마세네레 산이 편체 요에데 라네 투투에 된 가서 있다는데 데려와. 투투를 배걸 손도와.
So therefore it says that we should put an effort, or to put an effort to engage in the practice that we will have the fortunate rebirth in our future. Need to be the cost need to be accumulated right from now.
다 델레 자체로 떠나야니 년중이 삼반양설해야 되러와. 아니 델레 자체로 되 상추기 생데 아주 민난 전세된 양에 제투로 베데 리소 런셰다 제바데 스제레레션 따투 말에다 존에 som바나기 민나가 som네 제투그래.
So this is how we actually further our practices. First one, accumulate the practice, engaging in the practice of accumulating virtues, engaging in the virtuous practice and virtuous actions, and then further one's practice to the generation of renunciations, bodhicitta, and so on and so forth. So, so it is not impossible for us to actually engage in those practices and accomplish such spiritual realizations if we were to follow the precisely as it is mentioned in the text itself.
디가는 가서 디가서 봐봐 더더 싫어 이제는 아니 따와잖아 시에서는 아니 엄마 배 따와 아니 라시지마 루가 생긴 데리지레 상에게 아니 디 고아데 소소게 베샬로에레 게이시냐 저기 취반여여레 지 시장就고알래나야 렌즈 슈퍼저로 소에들여로
So therefore we are having such a wonderful opportunity to have understanding, the clear understanding of the view, the standpoint of the Madhyamaka, or the middle way standpoints, such as that things doesn't exist inherently and so on and so forth. So when you go through this, it is always reading the text and have a proper understanding of what is meant by non-inherent existence, and then rely upon one's teachers and so forth. So if one continue to engage in such practice, and just mere hearing the words non-inherent existence, the mere hearing of that word non-inherent existence will shake shake your strong grasping at self.
내가 저 샤세올로 소바다 가지 링아에서지 계정 강체고에서나 아니 지 저기 동료도 별로다 상주선 라지를 제터를 미네 아니 소사 제제 제거 백해 첨부에서로 코드 제비토네 다 미유 콜레자네 내가 제거해 다 가서 나도 가는 차전지 차로도 되는 메자와지 미유질을 자네 내가 제거해 코 사체들이야 로에게 인텐체의 슈체를 로에서로.
So therefore it is very important that our objective of engaging in all sorts of practice of body, speech, and mind, such as prostrations and so on and so forth, should be embraced or the influence or the imbued by the generation of bodhicitta and generation of wisdom realizing emptiness.
she no loida. Teta Misheba Sandwane, Teta Misheba Rangi, Misheba the Mishibi Shozone, Teta la Lo Mugoso Shemanane, Raya Pona, Jaya Pon Shijin, Temba Nubi, Temba Nubi and Gender Doa, Mejate, Dokin Letubale, Sondo.
So then here it says, otherwise, if you take the position that you personally cannot understand the deeds or cannot do them, and you then say to others, you do not need to train in them, not only do you ruin yourself and bring ruin on others as well, but it also becomes a condition for the decline of the teachings. So do not do this. As Nagarjuna's compendium of sutra, the sutra Samudaya says.
Dear Lajate, Matsu Koko, Natson Koko around. Yena Matsu the Tanatsu de children on the Gijana, the document, the so that came Omaro. Yena Tangatsu Tomo Mabane, the Castle Lopishola Kons, Chow in Zane. To show the Yin Janjosane, and Zansho del Joaton and the Hale Kalakova.
So here, this is also the advice, although that we may not become a condition for the, we will not, become a ruining of oneself and also as well as the others. But this is also, we should also take this as advice for ourselves, because we as the ordinary beings, right from the beginning, let's come up until now, we are very familiar with our wrong thoughts, the erroneous thought, erroneous belief. So therefore, we need to put in effort to really to convert oneself, but to really to make a change, to transform our thoughts from the erroneous thought to the correct thoughts. It requires a lot of effort for us. So here now, normally in this on this planet Earth, when we speak about what is good and what is bad, it entirely depends on how you think about that particular person or he or she. Whether he or she is good or bad, it depends on how you think about that individual. Without knowing the actual, the actual personality, the reality of that person, but we make a distinction whether bad or good person is based on how you think about that individual. Our way of discernment or the discriminations, bad or good person, or the wholesome or unwholesome person, it is clearly derived from our ignorance. Because as His Holiness always say that if you're able to practice bodhicitta, there is no such person that is good or bad to us. You will be able to see everyone equally, without any biased thought. That your biased thought with regard to the different individual will be eliminated. So here now it says now, it is, if you have this, the partial way of thinking, the very partiality, the partiality views will really ruin yourself and that of other beings. Everything that this will really bring about, unwanted result.
Dokile tibale dimashala soso to la deshe je gewe jang yons jone dije leso shanchu ji lang ro de she la paro de shimbi lang yons metse na dije leso shedang tola keba da jewi shanchu sembe chu samo ni la ngoba zumba me jao shedang 상황상주 매쳐봐 내장 소도 리지번 데다 데페나 메네 줄레 바데 주면은 메시와 조로 알레 테마 리모트 지도 되고 바사 지자로지다 바사서는 상황상주 매쳐봐 거다 자지
맞아. So it says now, the Sutra Samuchaya says that discerning even the non-composite and still being disillusioned with composite virtues is Dhamanic activity. Understanding even the path to enlightenment and still not seeking the path of the perfection is Dhamanic activities. Bodhisattva who lacks skill in means should not strive for the state of profound reality. And the Sutra of Showing the Tathagata's inconceivable secret says.
되게 된다 된거래 또. 아무튼 디마시 소소도 베서나 다 다음에 또 라 이네 공부 문제 와데 아니 제로바 레로체와사나레 아니 샹추 삼바도서 파로도 심발은 무초와사나레 아니 드스 모체와데 아니 디젤레지 코노 저거래 손 이게 컨도 진다 정데 디지 디젤레 니니 디젤레서는 뭐지 장소가 가세 아니 디젤레 가르레서로 아이나 아니 디마시 소소도 베로 돈이도 베로 무초와 말이 로초와를 좁아서나레 마수지가 돈이도 베로라 잡아체는 쇼바 디제 디젤레 샹추 셈비 쇼발로 로무투바 아니 무초와 샹추 셈 무초와 아니 디세 아니 디젤레레 손도와.
So here it is very clearly mentioned that that discerning even the non-composite and still being a dissolution with the composite virtues is the Dhamanic activities, right? That is demonic activities. Understanding even the path of enlightenment and still not seeking the path to the perfection of demonic activities. So then here it also says the bodhisattvas who lack skill and means should not strive for the state of profound reality.
다시 털어키베 샹주 semba 담에도 별로 측인도 요 말이 계시면 저나 디젤레레 손도와 몇종의 요 말로 다 샹주 semba이나 맞은 데 샹주기 센데 사다베 세다베 샹주기 센 총은 전달해서나 야 공편도 로드만 많이 해요 말로 총은 중에 내가서로 이니 돈이도 별로 로모도 막 상해요로 the digital 장도마도 저는 털어키베 샹주 semba 돈이도 별로 측인데 요 말이 몇종의 요 말로.
So it just says that bodhisattvas who lack the skill and means should not strive for the state of profound reality. So there won't be such bodhisattvas actually. So long as the bodhisattvas who is above the the accumulation of the middle accumulation of the path. There are three stages of the path: the small, middling, and then the great. So above, the bodhisattvas who are above the middling accumulation of the path will always, equipped with those means or the skilled in means, in order to, and having a genuine genuine aspiration to understand, aspiration to to understand the ultimate nature of reality.
제가 제가 가서 배바이 빼줘요. 제가 대장 저번에 가서 대시 가서 파이도 빼던데 빼나로와 배전 중에는 자와로와 배전 중에나 아니 총고니에서 그래. 다샤르니에는 장고니에서 배 보원이나 년고니에서는 지세요. 대단 가서 배전 중도 쇼게야 몰라져야나 최대야 거기 이거는 때문에 비타래 송도하대. 이 장도는 게 빼자고요.
그래서
So, Bezenju does a Tawa, the Tachun does a Shuni Koyasona, any Chura, I am Chunian Bares. Any Tasharas and the same yes wine, any dry water, Jangoni. Any bed Pomont and Shuni, any ne Namalegumare said, the Digipena with the Redua. Yes, I'll do some of the Matsung and the Matsung in the Yomarwa. Tola Kepa, the Shantu Samba Tola Kepa, and don't you do Mazama DJ Society, and the dependent on the door.
That's all. That's why.
The Tata Badena Masonati.
Rumse, engage is on the Madonete, para the jet.
That's the thing yet, and the long to the Carsana, Sanji Tembano, Jolo Dobi, Jensetela, Chanyu Gudua.
No,
Tell saying also pay the Petty average. Pets and Union, a Chongo Niasalagari, Pets and Jus and a Tawara.
No.
Chewing what in chewing what near Baris. And the Tasharas and the Posat and the Ketero. Tasharan and the Jangonian Secretary. Ja.
Oh,
Near Pomonian and Nangonian Secretary. Pomot and the Neson, Nangonian, Nelson, Chinsa, and Relaya, Yajendo Mar Sagero. Pet and over the toss in a dead dog, Charlie the machine.
So, Rinpoche is actually by citing some, we have a saying in Tibetans. But again, it says the young monks, if the young monks, strive to sleep more, will not be able to listen to the teachings of the Dharma. In other words, will not be able to really, follow the teacher's instruction and studying of the Dharma. And the very young person at home in household, strive to sleep more, then such a person will not be able to, not be able to destroy his or her enemy, his enemy. And the young woman, if she's sick, strive to sleep more, and then she will not become a groom of anyone. Sorry, the bride of anyone. Sorry, she will not become a bride of anyone. Okay. That's why.
Yeah. Yeah, any cholo soda. Soda.
Me, Rinpoche soon you think I will come on the gas, but Rinpoche Dr. Goddess.
Ale, Jidu. Tanda Tino Linget and the Peja de Shanchu Samba Tino, Yitanda, Yitanda loans, Yitanda son the joint. Tola Keba Tokeba Shanchu Samba de Daye, any don't you do be Cheryl Joa Chegamaroa. Any Tola Keba the Shanchu Samba does you don't you do Lola Mazama Chegamaroa. Kiss it on Mazama Jana, Digilere Sondoa, Pede double the Tonswa. She said, that's you met.
So this is what Rinpoche actually set the example. He was bringing those, citing from that that we have saying in Tibetan. It is just there won't be any actually bodhisattvas who is on the path and who doesn't really aspire to attain the wisdom realizing emptiness. There won't be any bodhisattvas.
That's something mene jule bade jumena ne showa joro dejen do mipas re dejen da mipale sembade mipa mena sen showa joro toke shanchu semba sharaje parodo shin yonaba mipa nyawa showa chiba ge zawa mipa ne nyawa showa mi nyomo la joa mishi parodo shin bi mipa la joba shi Nomba Niji Mibala Soso Tola, Senjen Tanjela, Niji Chembi Mibala Tao, She Miba Melu Tang, Miba Yulu, Soso Sumba Nang She Goso Sum.
So here's this the Tathagata's the sutra of showing the Tathagata's inconceivable secret says, the children of good lineage, it is like this. Fire, for example, burns from a cause and goes out when its cause ceases to exist. Similarly, mind is activated by an observed object. Without this, it is inactive. The bodhisattvas with this skill in means know, through the purity of their perfection of wisdom, the elimination of truly existing observed object, and yet they do not eliminate the observation of the roots of virtue. They do not give rise to the observation of the afflictions, and yet set their attention on the observed object of the perfections. They discern as observation of the emptiness, yet still observe and consider all living beings with great compassion. You must distinguish between the explanation of how there is no observed object and explanation of how there is an observed object. Accordingly, while you must loosen the bounds of the afflictions and the conceptions of the sign of true existence, you must be firmly bound by the rope of ethical trainings. And while you need to eradicate both kinds of the misdeeds, deeds that are wrong by nature and the deeds that are wrong by provisions.
되지. 데 가서 가서 저거 때는 레와야다 미 되다. 거기에 다나 하샤게 제 일을 메셔버시디 미발에 진짜 샤 그거 말이 미바 제 일을 메셔는 로데 되고 그래서 라바로와.
So, so here now it's again it has a strong related, it has a connection to the previous the Hashang's position, the rejection of the Hashang's position, because the Hashang had stated previously that one's practice of meditation should be objectless. There shouldn't be any object that's involved, but rather one should single-pointedly engage in meditative equipoise on nothingness.
yeah. Tell me pa ngepa de mi pa gores. Mi pa me na lo de shindo gore. Pena member you just shime na me de shindo goras. Inchi mi pa gores on.
So what it's really this particular passage states is it is very necessary that we need an observed object. Just like the fire needs its causes and conditions. Without causes and conditions, there won't be any fires. The fire will, when this cause is ceased, it will go out. It will go out when the cause is ceased. Similarly, in order to have an active mind, we need to observe object, which actually sustain your activity of your mind.
Yang kong gale dame to be shara tenile mi pa shewa second mi pa meba logo do asete ani danzi gi mi pa la lagres ma to tanda de je che ta mi pa se che yang mi pa yo de mi pa me se gi tanye de she yo de mi pa me se de kande chelo ko go sana denzi gi truba shewa chila ani mi pa shewa seng ko chi ma to tanda ji shangchu sen la so ba gi gewa che de yo so zo ba ani mi pa de yo re eso. Here,
we must understand, sometime when we talk about the wisdom realizing emptiness or the wisdom realizing selflessness, we would also call this is wisdom realizing selflessness is also known as the wisdom objectless wisdom. That doesn't mean it doesn't have an object. What is meant by the objectless is referring to the independent self. Independent self is the object of the grasping at self, right? Independent self is the object of grasping at self. When the wisdom realizing selfness is actualized, and this grasping, the object of the grasping at self, which is independent self, is negated. So that is what is meant by objectless wisdom. That doesn't mean that wisdom doesn't have object.
Kwa de sebo chaswa dame to be shiro yimi ba nyama shese de kare labure se de denzi nyama shebala gogore nani shangchu sen la so mi ba yore shangchu sen gi mi ba de zojang de hinji mi ba de dongye chenje sanjero wa.
So here all of this, the virtuous thought such as bodhicitta and wisdom realizing emptiness and compassion has its own object. There's observed object. It's always involved because the wisdom realizing selflessness will actually actually eradicates completely of independent self. The grasping at independent self, in other words, grasping at inherent self. So here, now similarly, the non-inherent existence of self or non-inherent self or the non-intrinsic self should be the object of the wisdom realizing emptiness, wisdom realizing selflessness. Similarly, the state of complete enlightenment should be the observed object for the bodhicitta, and the overcoming of the suffering of all sentient beings should be the observed object of the compassion. So each of those great, qualities has its observed object. There's no such great quality, mental quality which has no observed object.
Heman zimbi chiwa le gola lopi tape tang dang go ba tang kana ma to wa ni shi gola ge yi shawa na ma shi ba go be lopa dang ba tang ji ji jin ba ni mi ji jin son dang le ba dang zin ji chiwa re le ba ni mi ji ko son do.
So, while you need to eradicate both kinds of the misdeeds, the deeds that are wrong by nature and deeds that are wrong by prohibitions, you must not eradicate virtuous activities, being bound by the ethical trainings and being bound by conceiving signs of the true existence are not the same, and loosening the safeguarding of the vows and loosening the chain of the conceptions of self are not the same either.
Any Rani Devanya Salena Zuba Sanji Komatane, Raji Sanja Tanji, Tenda Devala Chijan Shawi, Nishaneba and Dina Shubelamano, Shinjala, so San, no Machada.
So let's do the dedications. Whatever the merits that I may have accumulated today by means of participating in receiving these particular teachings, may myself and all other sentient beings be able to integrate our practice of both conventional and ultimate truths, the true truths, in other words, and may by means of developing such realizations, may I gain, may I myself and all other sentient beings gain the state of complete enlightenment. May all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the 10 directions please bless me to be able to do this.
Nāge chīni sāpi gyewa de dēdāng zhōwa kyun gōngbē dāng chēpa jūsān lōsāng chāpa dēmbē nyēpo rēndō sējī shō sā jū bējī shūjī mēdō chōng rē rā līnjī nyēdē jēmā dē sāngjē shēndō mēdē bēwā yī Broken on ocean on shore, Jiwa Kundo Yang, Jimmy Chuja Bella Longe, Sadan Longe, Yede Rozone, Doja Changi, Go on Yudo, Shu, Yedan Guru, Major God. No, you are me, Dennis. Bele Zone, Kada Yamba, Sabandi, Lobe, Mare, Kedon, Giovanna, Nade, Jaya, Omba, Dajuji, Yama, Sebe, Kundaya, Jambe, Yanja, Sebe, Jezone, Dembe, Jipa, Kunsan, Anjeju. Nene Jobe Jena Nishu Rangi Tobe Langini Shuda Seve Tage Roye Yeju Mimba Sejene Jaye Temba Yure Zinjuji Yamba Rinche Choge Majama Chaja Nyamba Jube Shodene Niju Chenbu Yiro Jobayi Pende Dede Sewa Shebo Sho Sejin Jayu Mejo Chenele Leju Shanchu Langju Rinpe Jang Tande Nangju Yila Pende Shin Jayu Zeba Chendo Chongju Jin Lazang Zhubi Tenchen Zhuxie Jin Gejin Sisi Mada Mimiki Sero Gyudu Jaya Kambayi Nada Lada Jawa Majuji Kanze Teba Chola Chishuji Sijin Zhula Zumba Deyuzi Tudin Nangju Dadu Zhuxiji Zhaxi Jiangzi Shu Joju Ji Juzan Lami Kuzi Nanga Chen Shuju Jebana Lozan Tim Zhemin Sasanji Goye Minse Dado Nenjuji Kanda Rayu Goye Shinhas Pendan Dewa Male Joye Shire Zewa Deze Jatsoyi Shabe Sinti Bado Denjuji Jabe Bawe Cheta Chenbado Gundo Zambo Deyan Dejin Deda Gunju Jesa Daloshi Yewa Deda Tangje Rodo Deson Shebe Jawa Tangje Mawa Kana Chodo Abadi Dajin Geye Zawa Degen Jang Zombo Shishi Rodo 야, 도대체 괜히 막
That's all I can say, Los.